Hello, Principles of Democracy students. This is Ms. Buckingham, and welcome to your first screencast for Pod A. Typically, the way that we use screencasts in this class is to provide you with lecture notes covering material from the textbooks or things that we're talking about in class. Screencasts are a really important part of this class. Sometimes we won't have time to provide you with the lecture notes in class, so it's up to you. It's your responsibility to watch the screencast at home to get you the content that you need to know and understand for activities that we're going to be doing, discussions we're going to have, or upcoming quizzes or tests. So today's screencast is going to cover material from Chapter 1. It goes along with your textbooks. You can always find additional information there. And Chapter 1 is discussing the nature of power, politics, and government. So Chapter 1 wants you to think about why should you care about power, politics, and government. So the purpose of this chapter is really to introduce you to some main concepts that are going to follow us throughout this course. So first thing that the book talks about is power. So government is an opportunity to have power. There is power in government, whether it's coming from government officials or the power of the people in a democracy to vote. So there's different sources of power and authority. So there's a great diagram in your book on page 4 that you can reference that looks at the 5 sources of power. Okay, so this is the 5 sources of power that could be exercised by people in a variety of different roles. You will need to know these 5 sources of power for your first exam. So it's important that you pay attention to them, that you know all 5, and that you know some examples. Okay, so we could look at the idea of legitimate or formal authority as it's listed here. Legitimate authority is when power comes from the power holder's position and duties within an organization. So a principal, for example, is given formal authority. They're put in a position of power within that job. They have the ability to set rules or consequences, what have you. Expertise. The power of expertise is coming from that power holder's specific skills or expertise. So a doctor, a lawyer, someone who maybe has had additional training or skills that allow them to have power in that position to tell you that you've been diagnosed with something, or to advise you or give you counsel in some way because of the expertise that they have. Coercion, most of us are familiar with coercion. It's a big part of government. We'll talk more about coercion in a minute, but that is power that's coming from the power holder's ability to punish or penalize others. So the law, law enforcement, there is the power of coercion there. If you don't follow the law, you can be arrested and have a consequence. So that is a power that's very present in government. The power of rewards. Those of you that have jobs or even as students, you're very familiar with the power of a reward. Power is coming from the power holder's ability to give something of value. So your boss gives you money when you do your job. There's an element of power there. Responsibility, praise. Your teachers, your parents give you praise if you do something well. That is the power of a reward, promising you something or granting you something because of something that you've done. It could be a reward system. And then persuasion, or your book refers to as referent power, is when the power holder has the ability to persuade other people or identify with them. So maybe religious leaders, some government officials would use this as well. The power to persuade you to follow them or believe in what they're telling you because they have something in common with you. They can identify with you in some way. So whenever, whatever the source of this power, any of these 5, the power to rule can be used for good or bad, depending on the person who's exercising the power. So throughout history, and we'll look at history a little bit more in Chapter 2, rulers have used their powers to do really great things, build cities, promoting education and art, helping the unfortunate. Others have abused their power, stealing wealth from others, turning captives into slaves, committing genocide. So it's dependent on the person that's executing that power. So moving on. Social contract. So when we talk about those 5 sources of power, we also have to look at legitimacy. So what gives a ruler legitimacy? How are we as people going to follow a particular leader? What's going to make their power legitimate enough that we're going to believe them? We're going to listen to their rules. And again, whether that leader is a leader like a teacher or a principal or a parent, or it's a leader of a country or a mayor of a city, there's certain things that we can look at that give a ruler legitimacy. So throughout history, legitimacy has been given in different ways, whether we feel that there's a religious component, like the mandate of heaven, where leaders, rulers were given power because the God gave them that ability, or divine right. That was often used like in monarchies, where they said that a family of leaders was given that right to rule because of God granted the family that ability. We're going to focus in this class more on something called social contract. So social contract is a theory of government. It came from the European philosophers Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, and they talked about the legitimacy of government comes from an unwritten contract between the ruler and the rule. And under the terms of the contract, people agree to obey a ruler in exchange for the ruler's promise to protect their rights. So, I will be your ruler. I'm going to set rules and expectations. There's consequences if you don't follow them. It's a contract between the two of us. The idea being, I, as a ruler or a leader, would need to hold up that contract. I need to provide my people rights and opportunity. And if I don't uphold that contract, the idea of social contract theory is that the people could overthrow or remove the ruler from power. So this theory came at a time when most European countries were ruled by monarchs, and the people didn't have as much voice and choice as they would want. So the idea of social contract is really going to stem some democratic ideas and really be the foundation of American government. So we'll talk about this much more later on. So when it comes to the foundations of government, what is the purpose of government? The purpose of government is order, protection, and providing public goods. So when we talk about order and protection, and questions that you've probably already been asked by your government teachers this week is, what do we want from our government? What do we expect government to provide for us? The number one answers from students, even on the first day of class, is that we want to be safe. We want government to keep us safe. We want to have protection. In order to have that protection, there has to be some order. There has to be a process. There has to be rules. There has to be consequences, or it would be completely chaotic. So it is government's job in this country. Our people view it as government's job to preserve order and protect life and property. Okay, and also the providing of public goods. So a lot of the things that are provided to you, the school that you're sitting in right now, park benches, street lights, safe roads, those are things that government uses funds for to provide for its people in order to help keep order and protection. And we'll talk much more about this throughout class as well. So the idea of the building blocks of government, in order to provide order, protection, and public goods, there are two things that government has to have in place. Any government, whether it's here in the United States or elsewhere, if you are going to have order, protection, and public goods, you need to have these two things. Number one, you need to have a means of coercion. We talked about coercion a couple minutes ago. That's that power of being able to make people do something, or to have a consequence if people don't follow the rules or have the order. So in this society, means of coercion look like law enforcement, the court and law system, the prison system, corrections. So that is a way that government is able to maintain public order, whether it's following speeding laws or traffic laws, stopping at a stop sign, or it's greater things like not committing arson or robbery or murder. As a public, we all know that there are things that we're not supposed to do, and that if we violate those laws, we're going to go through the court system. If we are found guilty, we're going into the prison system or correctional system, and there's going to be a consequence. So that's a way that government helps keep order, and then but therefore keeping the rest of society safe by having those rules and policies. The second thing that's required is a means of collecting revenue. So that goes back to that public goods thing. If government is going to provide us with certain things, they have to have a way to collect revenue or money from its people. How do we do this? Those of you that have jobs know this really, really well. Government collects taxes. So tax dollars that are paid for by the people within cities, counties, states, the country pay taxes. That tax money goes to provide a variety of different things, whether it's paying for the police officers that we just talked about as that form of coercion, or the court system or the correctional system, paying for safe roads, paying for public schools, paying for that park bench or the public library. Government has to have a way to collect money in order to do that. So when it comes to ruling, then, another question that we would have to ask is, what type of system is the government going to set up? Who's going to rule? Is it one person? Is it a few people? Is it many people? This is going to differ based on the society and the wants and needs of that society and the various rulers. So throughout time, we've seen lots of different forms of government. We'll talk more about that in Chapter 2, but kind of a preview here. Typically, one ruler is going to be a king or a monarch. So we would look at monarchies if we decide as a group or a society that one should rule. That would look like a monarchy. If we say it should be a few select people, we typically refer to that as an oligarchy. If we say it's many people, it's what you're most familiar with, a democracy. Governments of modern nation states. So when we study government today, we're usually looking at more larger and complicated governments, which we refer to as nation states. All nation states, share these four characteristics. So number one, territorial integrity. That nation state occupies a specific geographic territory and it has a recognized boundary. So we know where Minnesota ends and Wisconsin begins. That makes Minnesota a nation state, okay? Or the United States. We know those known borders. The second thing is a population, a stable population. So a nation state has people living permanently within those boundaries that we just talked about. The third is a code of laws. So people of a nation state agree to live under a common legal system and are familiar with its laws, at least generally. And then the fourth thing is national sovereignty. A nation state has sovereignty, which means it's independent of other states and self-governing. All 50 states in our country are seen as nation states. They all meet this criteria. They have their own boundaries, they have their own populations, they have their own state laws, and they are independent and self-governing. And we'll come back to this concept as well. A couple more things quickly. Politics. What is the difference between politics and government? Politics is a process. Government is an institution. Okay? This will come up on a test. Please remember, politics is the process and the method of how we make decisions. Who gets what, when, and how. Politics are those elected officials that we have help us run our government. Government is the actual institution itself, the idea, the foundation, the officials within it that establish and carry out the policy. The actual institution is the government. The politics part is the process, the decision making. Lastly, keep in mind the United States is a republic. We are a representative democracy. So when we get to Chapter 2 and we start talking about all these definitions, we are here in the United States a representative democracy. We are not a direct democracy. We are not individually involved in the decision-making process. We as a people vote for people to represent us in government. So we are a nation in which supreme power rests. Sorry, this is kind of running out of room here. I'm going to move some things around quickly. We are a nation in which supreme power rests with the citizens and is exercised by their elected representatives. So kind of a wordier version of what I just said to you. We decide as people, when you are 18 or older and you go out and vote, you choose people who are going to represent you in government and hopefully vote for laws and policy that meet your philosophy or values, moral system. Okay? So obviously this is a really surface level view of all of these big concepts that we're going to be talking about repeatedly over the next several weeks. You've survived your first screencast. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.